gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to Robert's Sports Show. I'm your host, Robert. NCAA Week 13, lucky number 13. So last week, win-loss, I was 27-7 for a year-to-date of 243-84. Against the spread, I was 19-15 last week for a year-to-date total of 157-81. On the over-under, I was 15-19 last week with a year-to-date of 167 and 171. Here in week 13, I decided to let's just do all the FBS games. So I have all 64 games listed on the week 13 schedule. If you're new to Robert's Sports Show, I do picks, straight up picks, win-loss. I do against the spread, and I do the over-under. So the first time ever doing all the games scheduled for the week, let's get started. We have the Northern Illinois Huskies at 7-4 versus the Western Michigan Broncos at 6-5. I got the Huskies are favored by 5.5. I had them winning, covering, I'm taking over on the 51. Next, we have the Ball State Cardinals at 4-7 versus the Miami of Ohio Red Hawks at 5-6. The Red Hawks are favored by 17. I have the Red Hawks winning. I have the Cardinals covering the 17, and I'm taking over on the 54. Next, we have the Colorado State Rams at 3-8 versus the 4-7 Air Force Falcons. Falcons are favored by 14.5. I have the Rams covering the 14.5. Falcons win and under on the 61. Mississippi State Bulldogs 7-4 versus the Ole Miss Rebels at 5-6. The Mississippi State is favored by 10.5. I do have them winning. I have them covering the 10.5. I'm taking over on the 58. Next, we have the Texas Longhorns at 8-3 versus the 3-8 Kansas Jayhawks. Longhorns favored by 15 on the road. I do have them winning, covering the 15 and over on the 51.5. Next, we have out of the American. We have the American West 1 versus 2. We have the Houston Cougars at 8-3 versus the 7-4 Memphis Tigers. Tigers are favored by a touchdown at home. I do have the Tigers winning. I think the Cougars will cover the touchdowns. It's going to be a field goal type game. It'll probably come down to the last possession. And I have over on the 76.5. Next, we have the Nebraska Cornhuskers at 4-7 versus the 7-4 Iowa Hawkeyes. Hawkeyes favored by 10 at home. I think they'll win, cover the 10, and over on the 53. Next, we have the Central Michigan Chippewas at 1-10 versus the 6-5 Toledo Rockets. Toledo is favored by 18.5. I have them winning, covering the 18.5 and over on the 53. Next, the Eastern Michigan at 6-5 versus the Kent State Golden Flashes at 2-9. I got Eastern Michigan is favored by 13.5. I'm picking them to win. They'll cover the 13.5 and over on the 52. Next, the Akron Zips 4-6 versus the Ohio Bobcats at 7-4. Bobcats favored by 23.5. I have them winning. I have Akron covering the 23.5, and I'm taking under on the 55. Next, we have the Buffalo Bulls at 9-2 versus the Bowling Green Falcons at 3-8. Bulls favored by 2 touchdowns on the road. I have them winning, covering, and over on the 59. Next, with the Arkansas Razorbacks at 2-9 versus the 7-4 Missouri Tigers. Missouri, I just don't understand. They've lost to good teams. They've lost to bad teams, but they beat Florida, which was a good team. Drew Lock is supposed to be one of the top quarterbacks coming out in next year's draft. I know Mel Kiper has dropped him like 23rd or 24th overall, like the 5th best quarterback. So Missouri's got to do something if they want Drew Lock's status to rise. He needs to go out, especially against a 2-9 Arkansas team, and just dominate. He needs like 5 or 6 touchdowns, no interceptions, about 400 yards to kind of raise his stock back up, hopefully. Missouri is favored by 22.5 at home. I got the Tigers winning. I got Arkansas covering at 22.5. Don't think it'll be quite that big of a margin, maybe 21. And I'm taking under on the 61.5. Next, with the Coastal Carolina Chattahoochee, whatever they are, 5-6, versus the South Alabama Jaguars, 2-9. Coastal Carolina is favored by 2. I do have them winning, covering, and over on the 58. Next, we have the Battle of Virginia. The Virginia Cavaliers at 7-4 versus the Virginia Tech Hokies at 4-6. Cavaliers favored by 4. I have them winning, covering the 4 and over on the 50. Next, we have the East Carolina Pirates at 3-7 versus the 9-2 Cincinnati Bearcats. Bearcats favored by 19.5. I have them winning, covering. I'm taking over on the 51.5. Next, Oregon Ducks 7-4 versus the Oregon State Beavers 2-9. Ducks favored by 16.5, winning, covering, under on the 68. We have the University of Central Florida Knights at 10-0 versus the South Florida Bulls at 7-4. The Knights are favored by 2 touchdowns. I have them winning, but I have the Bulls covering. I'm taking under on the 68.5. I think the NCAA needs to do something with this exact scenario. You have the playoffs. You have the playoff committee. You have the 4 playoff teams. It's been, from what I understand, only Power 5 conference teams. Okay, simple. There's 5 Power 5 conferences. 1 gets left out, not a problem, blah, blah, blah. We've done it for 4 years, 5 years now. All of a sudden, Notre Dame, who's an independent, is undefeated. Oh, they should be in the playoffs. What about a team like Central Florida? They're undefeated. They're not getting dick about love for this because they're not part of the Power 5, but neither is Notre Dame. I think they need to redo it, and if you check out Robert Sports Show, go to YouTube, Robert Sports Show, look at all the folders, and go all the way to the bottom. You'll see, I think it's topics or something. There is an NCAA one of my first videos of 2018, how I would redo the NCAA. Check that video out, and it kind of lays out exactly how I would fix it. That way you don't have, number 1, you don't have the playoff committee, and number 2, you settle it all on the field. But I have the Knights winning here, going 11-0. Next we have 1 versus 2 out of the Big 12. We have the Oklahoma Sooners at 10-1 versus the West Virginia Mountaineers at 8-2. If the Big 12 wants any hope of getting anyone into the Final Four playoffs, Oklahoma has to win here and win big. And then go on undefeated with 1 loss and win the Big 12. If Oklahoma loses here, there's no shot of a two-loss Big 12 champion being in the Final Four. The Sooners are favored by 1.5 on the road, with an over/under 81.5. In the Big 12 this year, just the Big 12 games, conference games for the Oklahoma Sooners. In the game, the average total points 85. So I'm taking the Sooners to win. They'll cover the 1.5. Taking over on the 81.5. Next, we have Washington versus Washington. The Huskies of Washington University, 8-3, versus Washington State Cougars at 10-1. Pac-12 North, 1 versus 2. The Cougars are favored by 3 at home, winning, covering the 3 and over on the 53. Next, we have the Western Michigan Hilltoppers at 2-9 versus the Louisiana Tech Bulldogs, 7-4. Bulldogs favored by 11. Got them winning, covering, and over on the 48.5. Next, with the Baylor Bears at 5-6 versus the Texas Tech Red Raiders at 5-6. Texas Tech is favored by 6.5. I had them winning. I have Baylor covering. I think it's going to be a field goal game. And I'm over on the 65. Next, we have the Navy Midshipmen at 3-8 versus the Tulane Green Wave at 5-6. Tulane favored by a touchdown at home, winning, covering, over on the 53.5. Next, we have the Syracuse Orange 8-3 versus the Boston College Eagles at 7-4. Boston College is favored by a touchdown at home. Again, this is one of those games I think it'll come down to the last possession. I can see 3-4 point difference. So I have Syracuse covering at 7, Eagles winning, Orange covering to 7, and over on the 57.5. Next, we have a huge game out of the Big 10. We have the Michigan State Wolverines at 10-1 versus the Ohio State Buckeyes at 10-1. Michigan's loss was to Notre Dame. Ohio State's loss was Purdue. You determine which one's a better loss, if there's such a thing. Michigan is favored by 3.5. Whoever whoever loses this game will not be in the playoffs, plain and simple. Whoever wins this game may not make the playoffs neither. Because if you look at it, if say Ohio State wins, they got one loss, they go on to be Big Ten champions. You have Oklahoma, Big 12 champion with one loss. You have Georgia with one loss. What if they beat Alabama in the national championship, in the SEC championship game? So you have Alabama with one loss. You have, say, Ohio State with one loss. You have Oklahoma with one loss. You have Notre Dame undefeated, Clemson undefeated, and Georgia in the playoffs. Who gets that final spot? So yeah, that's this kind of scenario. So this game has huge implications on the playoffs. I got Michigan winning. I got them covering the 3.5. I got over on the 57. And I got Urban Meyer leaving Ohio State at the end of the year. Next, we have the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets at 7-4 versus the Georgia Bulldogs at 10-1. Bulldogs are favored by 17. They win. They cover over on the 59.5. Next, we have the Marshall Thundering Herd at 7-3 versus the Florida International Golden Panthers at 8-3. Marshall favored by 2.5. I given that 2.5 to the Panthers. They're at home. I got them winning, covering under on the 52.5. Next, we have the Florida Gators at 8-3 versus the Florida State Seminoles at 5-6. The Gators are favored by 5.5. by them winning, covering, and over on the 52. Next, we have the NC State Wolfpack at 7-3 versus the North Carolina Tar Heels at 2-8. Wolfpack favored by 6.5. I got them winning, covering, over on the 62.5. Next, we have the Wake Forest Demon Deacons at 5-6 versus the Duke Blue Devils at 7-4. Blue Devils favored by 12.5 at home, winning, covering, and over on the 59. The Old Dominion Monarchs 4-7 versus the 1-11 Rice Owls. Old Dominion favored by 9. I got them winning, covering, under on the 63.5. Next, we have the Purdue Boilermakers at 5-6 versus the Indiana Hoosiers, also at 5-6. The Boilermakers are favored by 4.5. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 62.5. Next, we have the New Mexico State Aggies at 3-8 versus the 4-6 Liberty Flames. Liberty favored by 9. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 73.5. Next, we have the Georgia Southern Eagles at 8-3 versus the Georgia State Panthers at 2-9. The Eagles are favored by 11. I have them winning, covering, and over on the 58.5. Next, we have the Wyoming Cowboys at 8-6 versus the New Mexico Lobos at 3-8. Cowboys favored by 6.5. I do have them winning, covering, and over on the 45.5. The Troy Trojans 9-2 going into Appalachian State Mountaineers, who are 8-2. This is 1 versus 2 in the Sun Belt East. The Mountaineers are favored by 11 at home. I have them winning. I have Troy covering that 11, and I'm taking over on the 48. Next, we have the Stanford Cardinal 6-4 versus the UCLA Bruins at 3-8. Cardinal favored by 6.5. I got them winning, covering, under on the 57.5. Next, we have the Southern Mississippi Golden Eagles at 5-5 versus the 1-10 UTEP Miners. Golden Eagles favored by 13, winning, covering, and over on the 44.5. Next, the University of Alabama at Birmingham Blazers 9-2 versus the Middle Tennessee Blue Raiders at 7-4. Blazers favored by 2 on the road. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 52. Next, Louisiana Raging Cajuns at 6-5 versus the University of Louisiana Monroe Warhawks 6-5. Warhawks favored by 3.5, winning, covering, over on the 69. Next, we have the Minnesota Golden Gophers at 5-6 versus the 7-4 Wisconsin Badgers. Wisconsin favored by 10. I get them winning, covering, and over on the 54. Next, we have the Battle of Arizona. The Sun Devils of Arizona State 6-5 versus the Wildcats of Arizona at 5-6. Sun Devils are favored by 1.5. I got them winning, covering, under on the 64.5. Next, we have the Illinois Fighting Illini at 4-7 versus the Northwestern Wildcats at 7-4. I got the Wildcats winning. They cover the 18 that they are currently favored by. I'm taking over on the 58. Next, we have the SMU Mustangs at 5-6 versus the Tulsa Green Golden Hurricanes at 2-9. Mustangs favored by 2.5. They win. They cover, under on the 57.5. The Maryland Terrapins at 5-6 going to Penn State. Penn State Nittany Lions at 8-3. They are the Nittany Lions are favored at home by 13.5. I got them winning, covering the 13.5 and over on the 54.5. Next, we had what should have been a good game, the Iron Bowl, the Auburn Tigers at 7-4 versus the Alabama Crimson Tide at 11-0. I like when this game means something. I like when this game, when both teams are good, when Auburn's got one loss or undefeated, and this means more than just bragging rights and a chance to go to be superior in the state of Alabama. The Crimson Tide favored by 24. Yeah. Tui's going to just light up the Tigers. Alabama covering the 24 and over on the 52.5. Next, we have the Temple Owls at 7-4 versus the Yukon Huskies 1-10. The Owls are favored by 29. I do have Yukon covering the 29. I'm taking under on the 67. Next, we have the Pittsburgh Panthers at 7-4 versus the Miami Hurricanes at 6-5. Hurricanes are favored by 5.5. This will come down to like final possession. I do have Hurricanes winning. I have Pittsburgh covering the 5.5. So I think it's going to be a field goal game. I'm taking over on the 15.5. Next, I have the Tennessee Volunteers at 5-6 versus the Vanderbilt Commodores at 5-6. Vandy favored by 3.5 at home. Winning, covering, and over on the 15.5. Next, we have the Arkansas State Red Wolves 7-4 versus the Texas State Bobcats 3-8. Red Wolves are favored by 13. Winning, covering, over on the 52.5. Next, the Rutgers Scarlet Knights at 1-10 versus the Michigan State Spartans at 6-5. Spartans are favored by 27 at home. Winning, covering, and over on 37. Next, we have the Charlotte 49ers at 4-7 versus the Florida Atlantic Owls at 5-6. Florida Atlantic favored by 17.5. Winning, covering, under on the 54.5. Next, we have the Colorado Buffaloes at 5-6 versus the Colorado Golden Bears at 6-4. Golden Bears favored by 12.5 at home. I have the Buffaloes covering. I'm taking over on the 43. Bears win. Buffaloes cover the 12.5 and over on the 43. San Jose State Spartans at 1-10 versus the Fresno State Bulldogs 9-2. Fresno favored by 31. A win, a cover, and an over on the 51. Next, we have the North Texas Mean Green 8-3 versus the University of Texas San Antonio Road Runners at 3-8. The Mean Green favored by 22.5. I have the winning, covering, over on the 51.5. We have the Kansas State Wildcats at 5-6 versus the Iowa State Cyclones at 6-4. Cyclones favored by 13.5. I have them winning at home, covering the 13.5 and over on the 40.5. Next, we have the Kentucky Wildcats at 8-3 versus the Louisville Cardinals at 2-9. Wildcats are favored by 17 on the road. I got them winning, covering, and under on the 51. Next, we have the South Carolina Gamecocks at 6-4 versus the Clemson Tigers 11-0. Tigers are favored by 26.5. Have the Tigers winning. I have the Gamecocks covering at 26. It's only going to be like 24 probably. And I am taking over on the 58.5. Next, we have the LSU Tigers at 9-2 versus the Texas A&M Aggies at 7-4. Texas A&M is favored by 2.5 at home. I like LSU on the road here. I'm giving the 2.5 to LSU. I have them winning, covering, and over on the 48. Next, we have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish at 11-0 versus the USC Trojans 5-6. This could be a dangerous game for Notre Dame. This game, if they were to lose, let's just throw it out there. USC upsets Notre Dame. What happens? Notre Dame doesn't make the playoffs. Plain and simple. That's how I feel. A one-loss Notre Dame, again, you have a one-loss Oklahoma, Big 12 champions, you have a one-loss Notre Dame, you have a one-loss, say, Michigan, Big 10 champions, you have a one-loss, say, Alabama, because Georgia upsets in the SEC title game. Where does Notre Dame fit in this? They don't. You have a one-loss Washington State. In order for Notre Dame to make the Final Four playoffs, they have to win out. So I actually have Notre Dame winning this one game. I'm just throwing scenarios out there. I have Notre Dame winning this. I have them covering the 10.5. I'm taking under on the 54. Next, we have the Oklahoma State Cowboys at 6-5 versus the TCU Horned Frogs at 5-6. Cowboys favored by 5. I have the winning, covering, and over on the 57. Next, we have the Nevada Wolfpack at 7-4 versus the UNLV Rebels at 3-8. The Wolfpack favored by 12.5. I've been winning, covering, and under in the 62.5. Next, we have the BYU Cougars at 6-5 versus the Utah Utes at 8-3. Utah favored by 13 at home. I do have them winning, covering the 13 and over on the 44. Next, we have 1 versus 2 in the Mountain West Mountain Division. The Utah State Aggies at 10-1. Going into the Boise State Broncos, who are 9-2. I do have Boise State winning this. They're favored by 2.5 at home. I got them covering, and I'm taking under in the 67.5. And last but not least, we have the Hawaiian Rainbow Warriors 7-5 versus the San Diego State Aztecs 7-4. Aztecs favored by 16.5. I'm giving Aztecs the win. I'm giving the points there, or the 16.5. I have Hawaii covering that. I'm taking over on the 54. So Aztecs win. Warriors cover the 16.5 and over on the 54. So that wraps up Week 13 of the NCAA college football season. All 64 FBS games here on Robert Sports Show. So stay tuned to Robert Sports Show for Week 12 of the NFL. And for, if you're a NASCAR fan, the NASCAR Champions Profile Series during the off season, and any pro wrestling that you deem to desire. And there's a lot coming to Robert Sports Show the rest of 2018 and beyond. As always, thanks for watching the Robert Sports Show. And don't just have a great day. Have a spiffy day. Robert Sports Show, your YouTube leader in sports town content. And I want to say a special happy Thanksgiving to all these sports fans out there who take time out of their busy lives to watch videos on Robert Sports Show. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy holidays to all. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate all the views.